In my role, I manage the bid process and respond to incoming RFPs and RFIs. And interestingly, I also work closely with the product team and design and deliver programs that enable customers and even our own internal team on the best ways to take advantage of the AI proposal software we develop since we are a software vendor. But that said, I just want to emphasize that the session today is not a product pitch. You won't see or hear of any AI tools. In fact, what you learn today applies to AI in general. So it doesn't matter what tool you use, or maybe you don't use any AI tools formally as part of your proposal process yet, and you're trying to figure out where the best place is to start. So the goal of this session is to share from my own experience doing this type of work, 5 practical workflows that you can probably start using immediately. And the idea is to start small, focus on specific aspects of the overall process. And then when you do that, you might be amazed, in fact, at how these small things can add up to some major wins. So one question I'd love to ask the room, if you had to think about your last bid, how much time was spent on tasks that were necessary, of course, but that no one would call strategic? Things like copying and pasting, reformatting, hunting for content, chasing a SME or checking let's say not chasing a SME, but maybe checking a client name. You can respond in the chat. I'd love to see. Too many, I agree, Mark. Yeah, 6+, that's a lot. Oh gosh, 75%. That's far too much. And I think maybe that's the answer, right? We do spend a lot of time, yeah, a lot of time on these types of things. So, well, and I would be prepared to, I bet that the work didn't actually require somebody with your experience to do all that. So a lot of this work is actually well suited for AI, and it's a key focus for this session today. So hopefully you'll leave with some practical tips. But 3 things I also want to leave you with today is first, if you're thinking about AI, is where to begin, where to start using AI first. Not everything that AI can do is a sensible place to start. So I'm going to give you 3 filters for deciding which work to hand over first. And then second, what guardrails to put around it. I'm going to keep those very practical. So don't worry, you won't get a 40-page governance policy. There are 3 things actually that cover a surprising amount of risk. I'm so sorry, I did not put my phone on silent, but let me make sure I do that now. Okay, done. And then third, how to build confidence without rebuilding the proposal process you already have. Because I think one of the biggest mistakes teams make is treating AI adoption as this massive transformation program before even proving that one workflow works. So you don't need to reinvent your whole process. You just need a useful starting point. So before I jump into the 5 workflows we'll cover today, I want to spend just a few minutes on the framework behind them and how things have changed. And they are, because otherwise we just end up with a lot of interesting tricks. But I think the more important question is to kind of get to thinking of, why certain workflows make sense to hand over, why others don't, and where the human judgment should stay. So we're going to look at the mind shift first, then the 3 filters, 4 things I think should stay human, and finally the delegation ladder that describes how work is delegated to AI, because not all AI use is the same. All right, and the mind shift. This is probably the biggest change I've noticed in my own work. The work hasn't disappeared. What has happened is that the hours have moved. And these numbers that you see on the screen are in fact my numbers. They're not a vendor benchmark. They're definitely not meant to be scientifically representative of every proposal team or every proposal or type of proposal. It's just an honest view, really, of how my own time has changed. So on the left here, I've listed some high-level steps and stages, and on the right, the share of the total amount of time spent on the bid. So what's changed compared to before and now is that the overall time has definitely decreased. In this example, I looked at a bid that would have taken us about 10 days 3 years ago, and that now we can do in 6 days or less. And also do a lot better in the sense that we end up with a much higher quality proposal than we did previously. So more client focused, much more strategic in terms of identifying the right win themes, applying them throughout consistently as well. The story we're telling through our proposals has definitely improved. And I won't go through each one of these steps, but just to highlight a few of the biggest shifts of where we spend our time now compared to before Gen AI. So before Gen AI, a huge amount of the week could disappear into assembling a draft, finding content, copying it, reformatting it, moving it around, tailoring it manually. Today, far less of my time goes into that. But interestingly, if I look at what has grown proportionately relative to the total time spent on the bid, I spend a lot more time now on planning and strategy, reviewing and refining, managing the work. And then there's a completely new category, directing AI. And by that, I mean that is the work of telling AI what to do, giving it instructions, reviewing the output, and refining it. So I want to use the words mind shift quite deliberately because it literally has been a shift in how we spend our time, and it has changed what the job mostly consists of. 3 years ago, I might have spent half a day assembling something, and now for that same piece of work, I might spend 10 minutes explaining exactly what I want, and maybe another 15 to 20 minutes deciding whether what came back is actually good enough. And that's a very different skill. And it leads me to something I think proposal professionals need to get much more comfortable saying. I don't see the role disappearing. It is, in fact, moving up the value chain. So the lowest value part of a lot of proposal work has always been the assembly, finding, pasting, reformatting. And the higher value work is more in the directing and judging, being able to explain precisely what a good answer needs to do, to look at an answer and say why it isn't good enough. Did it miss the evaluation criterion? Is the evidence weak? Is it technically correct, but maybe irrelevant to this client or buyer? Did we answer a slightly different question from the one that was asked? These are things that humans are really best placed to judge. So proposal professionals already have that judgment. We use it every day. And I just think we routinely undersell how valuable that is. And AI actually makes that judgment more important and not less. Um, so you'll see that also reflected in the workflows coming up. So in thinking, where do you start? I would, there are three main filters that I use and share with you. First is the work predictable and repeatable? Is it the same process every time? Does the output roughly stay the same shape each time? Secondly, can I actually hand it off and then come back when it's ready for review? If I have to supervise every sentence, I'm not really getting much time back. And then third, what happens if it's wrong? That doesn't mean necessarily that AI doesn't, you never use AI for stuff that could go wrong. But what it does is it determines how heavy the review gate needs to be. and how much human judgment, how much scrutiny and how much reviewing would need to go into the work. So if you're thinking about where to start, I would start with the work that's the most repeatable, the easiest to review, and relatively lowest risk. And that's where you can start building confidence in using this in your process. Alongside that, there are four things that I think always stay human, and that's strategy, compliance, accuracy, and client relevance. AI can absolutely support all four, but it doesn't own them. The strategy is very much ours. The compliance sign-off is ours. We verify what's true, and we also decide what matters to the buyer. So you'll see that pattern as well throughout the 5 workflows. And then finally, before we get into that, one other distinction that's quite useful, because in the industry, we'll hear a lot about AI assistants and agents and automation, and sometimes those terms are used a bit loosely. Um, so perhaps a good way to think about it is as a ladder when it comes to handing over work. So at level one, which is usually an AI assistant, with an AI assistant, you drive. So you ask the AI, it answers, you decide what to keep next. It's almost a bit of a conversation. At level two, you delegate a defined task, and then you can leave and go do something else, and it completes the work while you're busy on other work. There still needs to be a person that signs off on it, on that work afterwards. Then at level three, with agents becoming more sophisticated now, that task can become part of the process and fire automatically at the right stage. So we've gone from directing AI at each step and manually requesting the work to be done to completely automating the request. So it's the same request each time. The AI just runs it. It's built in and it just runs at the right stage. The important control at levels 2 and 3 is that human review gate. So once it's produced something, even if you're not in a chat type conversation, it still needs to be reviewed. And when you're thinking about what you can give over to I would say start at level one, and only move up the ladder once the it starts getting boring and the rung below that gets boring. So if level one is still surprising you every day, and you're not super confident about that yet, there's no point going straight into level three or full-blown automation. So I would say progress through those stages for the different workflows that you want to give to AI, and evolve as you go. And that's a good way to build confidence. All right, so with that, I'm going to jump into the 5 workflows. And of course, if you have questions, I'll get to them a little bit later in the presentation. But feel free to post as they come to mind. So for the 5 workflows, and for most of the rest of the session, we're going to follow a fairly ordinary mid-sized professional services RFP for a software solution with some integrations, some customizations, quite standard stuff if you're in managed IT services or in tech. And we're going to follow it through 5 places where AI can remove repetitive work. So all the ones that you see before the submit stage. So bid no bid, first drafts, content adaptation, SME review preparation, and quality checks. Let's start at the beginning with bid no bid. So this is a really good AI workflow because the inputs and outputs for a bid no bid decision are often quite structured. So you will have information about the opportunity, the criteria, hopefully, account history, debrief notes, incumbent information, past pursuit data. So with that information, instead of walking into the meeting and spending the first half of it like reconstructing and reestablishing all that information and the facts with the team. Where AI can really help is it can screen that data for you, screen the opportunity against your own bid no bid documented criteria. And you could get three things back in return. These are you can get more, but this is what I'd recommend. Firstly, the bid no bid recommendation with the reasoning, a flagged list of the things the team actually needs to discuss, and also a short brief containing useful pursuit context. The most important part in this is that AI helps structure the go, no go call, but it does not actually make that call. The decision and the strategy stay very much with the team. And the value here isn't really speed so much as it is about alignment and the strategic benefit of making really good decisions. So if you think about a 45-minute go, no go meeting, very often a big chunk of that time, I don't know if it's happened to you, but we spend a lot of that time kind of reestablishing the facts. Um, like who is the incumbent? Have we worked with them before? Do we have this integration? And so on. And then only later in the meeting do you actually get to the useful conversation. But if you have aligned and you've got some good structured outputs, the 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 time that you need to spend, it becomes a brief recap instead of reestablishing the facts. So then you've got a lot more, most of the meeting that you get to the good part much sooner, and you can spend most of the meeting debating and arguing the case for and against the decision to bid. So the recommendation then isn't just based on the loudest voice of the room, which is another benefit, um, but you can see immediately what criteria, which criteria are strong, which are weak, where the disagreement is, and that leads to a better decision for sure. One thing to bear in mind, though, an important prerequisite is that you really do need to have your bid criteria written down. If the rules live in three people's heads, AI doesn't know them. So what ends up happening is that AI will fill the gaps, and you can end up with a very confident recommendation against criteria it effectively invented. So I definitely useful homework. If you don't have that down, I would definitely recommend doing that. It's good. You'll get value from it immediately, whether you use AI or not to help you automate parts of that process. All right, then workflow two. So now we're moving into first drafts. And for drafting, my rule here is that proposal content should be drafted from approved content, rather than simply asking a general model what it knows about your company. Because there are things that an AI assembling a first draft can know. It can know what's in your approved library, it can know about what the RFP is asking, can use those sources to assemble an answer, can show you where the information is from, ideally. But there are also things not found in a content library or in the RFP and that an AI can't know. And can't know about the decision that a BD lead gave last week, or if they steered you in a specific direction, a pricing decision, maybe something the client said in a meeting. And that is why the human still owns the argument. There's stuff that simply AI doesn't know. And also, the human owns accuracy on anything that the draft states as fact. A first draft is a starting point, but it's not an authority. I'll show you an example of how to get to a first draft, a good first draft. But before that, I would these are some capabilities on the slide here. Then I would recommend looking for, regardless of which technology you're using, you would want the AI that you're using to be able to work from your approved content, trace output back to its source. It makes reviews so much easier. You wanted to respect your content permissions, protect your data, of course, flag gaps honestly, and ideally put Ideally, you want a tool that works where you work, so that you don't have to copy and paste from multiple windows. So the point is really that if you can't trace, control, or trust the output, you will be creating more review work later rather than removing it. So it's a good idea to kind of the better the first draft, the less work there will be later on. That's kind of the idea. So I mentioned directing AI a little bit earlier, spending much more time there. It's a task we never used to do. And here's a really simple example of why that matters. So on the slide on the left, there's a first instruction that basically says draft an answer to the integration requirement, assuming it's read the RFP. And if you look at the output, it sounds perfectly fine, but actually it could belong to almost any vendor. It doesn't really address the requirement, it doesn't cite anything. But now, if we look at the second instruction, we've given it the precise requirement, the client, the source constraint, their environment, and importantly, what they're scoring, in this case, migration risk. So that context and that directing is very important so that you get a good draft back. And you'll see in the output example for the second part there and on the right, we get something much more specific. There's evidence, cites the sources, and it even flags something it couldn't answer. So using the same technology, you get a very different brief based on what, how much direction you give it. And that gap at the bottom is useful. And now I know, actually, I've made it in blue, but that might be part of the response that I get back. And that's really useful because now I know exactly what still needs an answer and it was maybe not found in the information. Often, for first drafts, we tend to judge, on how it sounds, and the language. But I would say that that's probably the least important thing. Smooth prose is not the test. A general chatbot can actually sound better because it has the freedom to invent details that make the answer sound great and complete, but the actual yardstick is much simpler. What you want is approved, traceable, true. And the great thing about that is that these are all things that you can verify. If it writes beautifully as well, great, but I would say truth comes first. I'll take an honest gap over polished invention every time. Then the next workflow is closely related, but slightly different, and that's adapting the content for the client for the RFP response proposal you're working on. So most proposal teams already have a library of approved content that has been written in a way so as to work reasonably well for lots of buyers or certain categories of buyers, and absolutely that's what you want. But the problem is that buyers don't score us on whether the content works reasonably well for lots of buyers. They score the answer that's in front of them and whether it makes sense for them and for what they're looking for. So the workflow here is to have the AI take that approved answer from your library that's written for anyone, look at the client's vocabulary, their priorities, evaluation criteria, and to reshape that content accordingly. What you want is the same approved claim, but without changing the underlying fact, but by expressing that fact through the lens of the buyer that it's using or that's the RFP's been issued from. The human still owns client relevance. So AI can tell you migration risk appears 14 times, or it can surface, oh, the client stated this is their priority. But deciding what really matters and what should lead the answer is still a judgment call that often AI cannot make. But in any case, I would say own that. And then this one is probably one of my favorites because I think it solves a problem we've all faced at one time or another, chasing SMEs. Um, and we will say we'll need a SME to review a particular section. But actually, there are two different reviews that that hide under the SME review sometimes. And the first is verification. Is the claim sourced? Does the source support it? Is the fact correct? A lot of that we don't really need a SME. Where the SME is needed and where we really need the review is the fit kind of questions. Is this the right approach for the customer, for their environment, for their scale, with their constraints? So that is where we would want to have a SME. So if you are using AI for this, instead of sending somebody a 12-page section and saying, can you review this? What you will probably want to do is separate the work, and you'll see how this can help. Proposal teams can help with the verification and can handle that. Although there are some exceptions, of course, there's some things that you do want to have a SME for, and that's numbers, versions, certifications. They still need a SME, but the goal is to be strategic about the SME's time. So they only spend time on things that only they can answer and where they will add value. And I'm trying to get to the next slide. Oh, there we go. All right. So let's imagine for a SME review. Imagine we are able to send this to a SME instead of sending them the whole proposal for them to have a look at and kind of decipher the requirements in there. What you can do with AI and have AI help you do is generate a small piece of work for a SME. AI can give you the context very succinctly and pull that incredibly fast, and then also generate very targeted questions that need to be answered by the SME. So some of these questions only require yes or no. Some of them might help you shape it for a specific client and tailor the response to them, so the response is not generic. And only the SME can really give us this kind of information because it goes beyond what we have in the libraries for their specific use case. And then finally, in the final line, I would add what else do they need to do, or if nothing else is needed on the rest of the section. So then, this is really the focus. These 5 questions would probably take a SME 15, 20 minutes. The SME knows exactly what you need, and you'll probably find that you don't have to chase them as much because the work is contained. It's easy, it's straightforward, everything's in front of them, and they can respond really quickly. And it gives you exactly what you need. A few simple rules that make it easier for the SME: ask close questions whenever you can. Give them the sentence and the context they need to be able to judge it. If you ask for decisions rather than rewriting any content, try and keep the list small if possible, 5 to 7 points. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but if you can keep it in small chunks, then that's better. And tell them where you don't need their input and what's covered. And there might be several stages where perhaps it's a SME contributing and then there's just a final review at the end. But getting those parts right and doing it in smaller pieces and with all the information in front, the SME doesn't have to go and search for that. It definitely makes it a lot easier. And the goal really here with using AI is to make their contribution quick and precise. And that helps the whole proposal team. Then the final workflow is quality checking. And I would split these into 2 groups. The objective checks are the safest things to hand over to AI because there is a right answer and I could verify that quite quickly. So did we answer every requirement? Are we within the word limit? And then you have judgment checks like contradictions, unsupported claims, and so on. So for the judgment checks, I would say here AI is great at surfacing candidates. The human still makes the judgment ultimately, but AI can flag them so that you've got a list to review rather than trying to keep it in your mind and going through it and checking it line by line. So it's not so much, is it AI versus no AI? It's just whether it's objective, you can verify it, or whether judgment is still needed. Give you an example of what you can ask AI to do for you. Um, Here for this is the output shape where you ask for findings rather than rewrites. I wouldn't recommend asking AI to review my proposal. It usually gets me an essay, but rather giving it a fixed output shape. So in this example, I've got location, issue, severity, and you can see some examples here. Um, and by asking for findings, I don't particularly want rewrites when I'm at the kind of towards the end and doing quality checks. I don't want the tool to silently change things. We've maybe reached that point for a reason. But what I do want it to do is surface the issue so somebody can decide what needs to change. So I'd recommend doing this quality check before your main review and then rerun it again after edits because that's where inconsistencies can easily creep in. There is an important limit here. AI can help us check compliance, but I don't think AI can fully confirm compliance. It can tell me that a requirement appears to have an answer and that something looks missing, but whether we have genuinely met that requirement is still a human judgment. So for quality checks, I think of AI as a second pair of eyes, not a gate. And the really real benefit is interruption removal. So if you have a senior reviewer, then he has to keep on stopping to fix wrong client names or inconsistent numbers or missing references. Very quickly, it's easy to lose the thread of the argument. So with these types of checks, you can clear those mechanical problems first, and then the reviewer can spend their time on things we actually need them for, the quality of the case that we're making. Okay, so now we've looked at the work, and I just want to spend the last few minutes on guardrails and confidence. I'm going to keep this deliberately practical. So, three guardrails, the questions I think you should be able to walk into security or legal with as you're contemplating your AI journey, and then how to make the first ask small enough that it can actually happen. So if you have got these three guardrails in place, that actually covers a surprising amount of risk. First, using your own approved content, permissioned as the source of permissioned content, and also having traceability. Second, putting a named human gate before anything reaches the client, which means naming a person and when they are going to be reviewing it at what point. And third, writing down what you tried, including what didn't work, so the team learns together. And that, and to build, and then finally to build confidence somewhere safe. So a great place to start is to take a bid you've already submitted, where you know what the right answer looks like, and then run one workflow against that. And you can learn a lot without putting any live client work at risk. If you're planning a pilot, you'll probably need security and legal involved at some point. So I would go into that conversation prepared. There's a few questions here about things to check internally, like maybe there's a approved software list, and we have that of what we're allowed to use and not use. Who needs to say yes? Um, and then also there's important questions to ask of vendors in writing. Is your content used for training? Where the data is protected, processed? Is it protected? Who owns the output? Permissions, we often forget that one. You don't want AI surfacing things that people don't have permissions for. And then also on the client side, does the NDA restrict third-party processing? So these kinds of questions and these ones on the slide, I think, can really help with starting the conversation. If you go in with, we want to use AI across all our proposals, you'll probably have a committee. But if you start with, okay, let's do one workflow, one pass bid, no live client data. That is a much easier conversation to start opening the door to these things. And then finally, before we get to questions, if there's one thing that I would like you to take away from all five workflows, it's this, is that AI amplifies whatever state your inputs are already in. Undocumented criteria will lead AI to produce confident answers against stuff that it invents. AI can also retrieve outdated content faster than any human could. And that really isn't really an AI problem. It's a governance problem. But AI makes it a lot more visible. And the reverse is true. So if you have good documented criteria, governed content, named owners, clear gates, these all give AI evidence that you can actually stand behind. So one of the highest return AI investments may actually be better governance. Um, my challenge to you, should you choose to accept, is to pick one workflow, run it on a bid you've already submitted, and write down what happened. You don't need an AI transformation program to start learning. You can really start small with one useful experiment. So I'll leave you with that last thought and open up the floor to questions. All right, so if you have any questions at all, you're welcome to post it in the chat. All right. Yeah, indeed. I see Brenda's comment about the schedule might differ quite a bit for a product. So you might have different processes based on different types of proposal. Uh, and indeed, some do require high level of customization. And then from Kyle, so I spend more time reviewing. Yeah, indeed, we do spend time reviewing AI generated content. I think that it's a good trade-off, or you have to see is it a worthwhile exercise and something to always consider. If you are spending as much time reviewing as you are using AI, then maybe that's not the right workflow. Oh, Q&A tab.
Sorry. Thanks,
Sorry.
Olivia, for checking that. There are a few questions in the Q&A tab.
Okay, you got that. Sorry, I was looking at the posts. All right. Okay, did I not show the right deck? Okay, we'll put the right deck in there.
Yes,
Sorry,
we
I'm
did
scrolling
end
down.
up putting the right deck in there. So,
Oh, did we? Okay, good,
yes.
good. All right. And Sarah, in a world where you have AI-enabled proposal response software, how are you managing the agent work? Uh, right, so the agents are actually, no, it's not a second AI product. A lot of I this is an educational session, so I won't go into our own software, but agents are usually built in to the proposal software. Modern proposal software have got AI built in, and that's where the real value is also. Okay, I can't really get into tools without getting into trouble because it's not a sponsored session, but thank you, Anonymous. Uh, All right. And Kamala, how much you use AI and go no go to scrutinize competition or existing incumbents? Yeah, that's actually super interesting. There are some AI agents that can do web research. Um, Sometimes you have that information and sometimes you don't. But when you do, it's really useful to have research the competition and give the AI access to, what are your capabilities? What is the client asking? And if there's information about what the competition does, AI can be really good at comparing and analyzing that. Um, and producing some very good recommendations. So we're definitely doing that as the technology is evolving and we're able to do that now.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you, Olivia. We very much appreciate you and your information sharing today. We also thank you all for joining this session. Please take a couple of minutes to complete the session survey in the tab to the right of your video player. We truly value your thoughts and we appreciate you taking the time to share your feedback. We hope you all enjoy the rest of APMP's Winning AI Essentials, and we hope to see you in the next session. Thank you.